Hope you're all doing okay. Got all your coursework turned in, more or less. So we thought it would be a good idea, given everything going on, to hear from many of the employers that have worked with us. Many are our own graduates, but these are folks who often hire CRP folks. And we thought it would be good to talk to them a little bit about what's going on now and get their perspective on things, and maybe get some advice from them for you all. So I'm just going to briefly mention their names. They can introduce themselves a little bit more if they want to. So we don't have Matt Hollon here yet from City of Austin Watershed Protection, but we have Martha Arosemena from GrantWorks. GrantWorks has hired a lot of CRP students over the years. Katie Coyne from Asakura Robinson, which also I think has a good contingent of CRP folks, and we're currently partnered with them on the Houston Harris County Housing Study. John Michael Cortez in the mayor's office. Everybody keeps, the screen randomly moves people around. John Michael's going to be teaching a class for us this summer. He's a CRP grad, and we've had people intern in the mayor's office with him, and I think in other offices he's worked in. Zach Stern, who I just learned now is moving from the Texas General Land Office to the City of Austin's Neighborhood Housing and Community Development Department. And Zach, I think you've worked in other city, or you've worked in different offices around town since graduating.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You get a city job, good. Scott Grantham, who's at the City of Austin Parks and Recreation Department, another CRP grad. So welcome to y'all. Thanks so much for spending a little bit of time with us today. So we sent out the questions ahead of time to our panelists to give them a little time to reflect on it. And so I want to start out with the first question, which is directed mostly to people who are working for public agencies right now. We asked them to think about, as cities and government entities have begun reacting to recent events, how will their approach to hiring change? So that's for John Michael, Zach, and Scott. I don't know who wants to start.
Well,
Zach?
I'll jump in if anyone else wants to. So it all comes down to money, and both cities and states generally have to have a balanced budget at the end of the year or the beginning of the year. So they're really going to be stressed now with reduced tax revenues, which is going to impact hiring and already has impacted hiring. The City of Austin has a hiring freeze. So that's huge. The federal government has an endless supply of money though. So they're always going to be a good resource. And any city or state agencies that receive federal funding grant or federal grants are going to be in a better position to be able to hire and to continue their operations going forward. So I just came from the Texas General Land Office, which one of its many responsibilities is disaster recovery for the state of Texas. And it is currently managing about $12 billion in federal disaster recovery funds. And Martha will be able to talk about that as well a little bit later. And so that money, half of it, or at least $4.3 billion of that is slated to be spent over the next 12 years. So they're not going to be running out of money anytime soon. And they're aggressively hiring lots of people, and CRP grads would be really well positioned for those kind of jobs. But at the city level, the city gets federal CDBG dollars, and there's additional funds coming through the CARES Act as well that's going to be distributed, and at the city end has to be administered. So the receiving entity for grant funds can always take a little bit of that money to be able to administer the money to then get it back out the door. So it'd be good to, in your job search, to keep that in mind and follow those flows of federal dollars down to the local level. And also, and again, Martha can talk to this, states and cities hire contractors and vendors and consultants. And so those firms that specialize in that field, so GrantWorks specializes in dealing with CDBG dollars and is one of vendors working with the GLO. to be a little bit more stability there.
Okay, thanks. John Michael, Matt, Scott, do you want to add anything there?
Go ahead, Scott.
Sure.
John Michael?
I was going to say, go ahead, Scott.
Oh.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, that was great, Zach. I think that just some observations kind of close to the ground at City of Austin is that we have had hiring freezes over the past few weeks. And whereas before there would have been hundreds of jobs posted on the city website, basically the pipeline was cut off. But I do want to note that looking yesterday on the city website, there were 39 full-time jobs posted and 11 part-time jobs. Some of those are not going to be relevant to y'all at all, but I would say that, getting started in your career in planning, that looking outside of the traditional, what may be considered like a planner job title or even a planner department, there are many at the City of Austin, just speaking specifically to us, there are many strange sounding titles like business process consultant and Muni Prague used to be one of them, Muni Prague 2. So they have very odd sounding names, but they are definitely in the realm of planning. And what's interesting is if you dig a little deeper and look at these job descriptions, a lot of times they'll say, we want a degree in this, or planning. And really, I think the city has been pretty good at taking planning as one of the possible entry fields, even to some of these things, Austin Water Utility, Austin Energy, looking at, and I did want to give a shout out to Development Services Department. If the planners don't know about this already, it's the idea, or if the folks listening haven't heard of Development Services, it's essentially, it's a very large department that is concerned with really development review and all aspects of site plans, subdivisions, inspections. And I worked for Development Services for a couple of years and found it to be a great experience. So that's a lot of information, but just to say that with the hiring freezes at the city, the pipelines were kind of, the faucets were kind of turned off, but there was a lot that was still in the pipeline as of a couple of weeks ago. And so those jobs are still going to need to be filled.
Okay, I think Matt, I saw you raising your hand there. Welcome.
Absolutely. Hey, sorry guys, I got a little bit of a late start here, fumbling around with my permissions. Thanks everybody for joining. And I'm Matt Hollon. I work for Watershed Protection at the City of Austin. And so there are a number of departments that have been allowed to continue to hire and actually introduce new positions, even in these lean times. We're fortunate to be one of them in the Watershed Department. We actually have a job posting currently, like Scott mentioned, there's a lot of postings out there. There's a Planner 3 position, frankly, posted for our own group in planning within Watershed Protection. So we did get a hiring freeze on temporary employees, which was obviously disappointing for us and for everybody. But anyway, we're just going to be monitoring the situation, and hopefully we'll be able to offer new job prospects as we can. But there is a little bit of hope there, at least at present. And obviously it's a pretty fluid situation that could change. But for the moment, at least some of the enterprise departments are continuing to hire new employees.
Matt, do you want to say something about that job and the content of it?
Sure, absolutely. So we actually did share this with Liz Mueller and the planning school, of course, because we get a lot of our employees from your program. I'm a grad as well as I think all the folks on the panel here, and we're looking for a planner with some real interest and a focus on community engagement. And so in the next few years, our department's going to be really engaged in a very big way in updating our our departmental plan. It's called the Watershed Protection Master Plan. And we're proud of our work. We're proud of the job we do interacting with the community, but we know we can do better. And it's been a long time since we've actually gone out and talked to the community and really gotten into the thick of it. And I know Scott Grantham's here with PARD, and you guys did your long range plan recently and really got out there and tried to reach hard to reach communities and talk to everybody. So that position is going to do a whole lot of different planning jobs. I mean, I think your experience as a CRP grad would be would be great, a great background, but then that community engagement piece is kind of the focal point of it. So if you look it up on City of Austin jobs, there's a jobs website. It's pretty easy to navigate. You can go to Watershed Protection specifically to filter down, and you'll see that Planner 3 position in there. So anyway, we're definitely hoping a few folks will be interested, and we'll see if they sign up. So
and I just want to jump in there real quick because Matt mentioned, you know, they're an enterprise agency, which with the city that means they are funded through your utility bill. So when you get your bill, there's, you know, a particular line for watershed protection, and there's your water utility and Austin Energy. And so those agencies are being funded by a different stream of funding rather than, you know, sales tax and property tax. So, you know, you guys are just entering the planning field. You should get really familiar with budgeting, municipal and state budgets, and those different flows, because that can, you know, lead you down the line to figure out, you know, what places are have a steady stream of income that'll, you know, perhaps lead to a job, or perhaps ensure that you're not going to lose a job because you go into some global pandemic, which is causing, you know, another Great Depression.
Yeah, that and other departments that might be receiving recovery funding once, if or when that comes around related to this crisis. So yeah, that's a really good point to make about the enterprise funding piece.
John Michael, do you want to add?
Sure. You know, just kind of backing up a little bit, you know, I feel for all y'all. not, you know, there is a lot of uncertainty as far as what the world is going to be like for the next several months. You know, I use this Zoom background because I'm reasonably certain I'm not actually going to be there in the fall, which is a tremendous loss that I'm coming to grip with. I'm going through the stages of grief on that. But, you know, let me just kind of talk a little bit about where we were pre-COVID, right? So, and a lot of the discussion is around kind of the municipal job market. It was already going to be a difficult time for municipal governments in Texas. Our state legislature imposed revenue caps on local governments that are pretty draconian. We were already in a position where our ability to raise revenue was not going to be able to keep up with most of our general fund needs. Now, the city of Austin is in a much better position than many other communities because of the incredible growth in tax base that we have here in the city, which isn't subject to that revenue cap year to year. And so we were going to be able to get by, but it was going to be a difficult time anyway for the next few years to justify additional positions that were not directly related to kind of core functions, like, although I would suggest planning is a core function, that was not related to public safety and some of those basic functions of the municipal government. And then we have COVID that hit. Now, the good news, and there's a lot of good and bad news, the good news is that because the governor did declare a disaster statewide, now municipal governments have the ability to go back to the revenue raising capabilities that we had before the draconian revenue caps. And we're now able to, and without getting in all the vagaries of it, we can now raise revenue for the next 2 years, kind of at the same levels that we were intending, that we could have before, which I think creates some opportunities for us to be very strategic about how we may want to invest. Now, the bad news is that we don't know whether we're going to need to raise revenues just to deal with the fallout economically because of the COVID. So the city of Austin, is projecting if we are able to kind of get back to some semblance of our normal economy by the fall, that we're looking at a revenue hole of about $40 to $60 million this year, and another 20 million or so next year. So we need to plug that hole just so we can avoid layoffs and furloughs, and be able to provide basic services. Now, we did get some direct relief direct funding from the CARES Act from the federal government. However, the provision in the CARES Act that was put in there was that municipalities are not allowed to use that money to plug their budget hole. It can only be used for things that were not previously budgeted. So you see the city council spending some of that money on relief programs, directly to people, directly to businesses, but we're still sitting with a $40 to $60 million hole in our budget, right? And which is why you see things like hiring freezes, et cetera. Now, there is an effort underway, lobbying that's been going on by municipalities, by states, asking the feds in the next round of relief to provide greater flexibility for that federal funding so we could use some of it to plug our revenue, replace revenue that we have lost, mainly sales tax and other things like hotel occupancy taxes, so that we aren't in a position where we're having to worry about not only can we hire more people, but can we keep all the people we got. The Congress is looking at those things now. Very likely the compromise will be instead of providing more direct aid to municipalities and states, maybe the compromise is to allow the aid that's already been provided to have that degree of flexibility. Were that to happen, the city of Austin would probably be looking to use some of that money to replace revenue. And given the ability to raise additional revenue, that would take pressure off of our need to use some of our new revenue raising capabilities because of the disaster to be used to plug that hole. So I think that actually bodes well for municipalities to be able to not only keep the people we have now, but to expand our programs. And a lot of the folks like myself, and I promise this is actually going to get to a relevant point here for you shortly, who are finally starting to, although we are very concerned about a second wave of infections and hospitalizations because of what we would consider the premature opening up of business activities here by our governor. We are very concerned about that, but we're doing everything we can to anticipate that and to ensure that as that happens, that we're able to handle it. But some of us have now started to be able to kind of pull our head out of the crisis response and start to look at recovery. And I think that the great opportunity is with recovery, how can we reimagine or reform the things that we have done in the past? This is an ability for us to reset and to think about how we recover in a way that leaves us much stronger than we were going in a lot of ways. And I think that this presents a tremendous opportunity for young planners, because the kinds of things that we're looking to transform as we come out of this, to take advantage, not to be crass about it, but to take advantage of this crisis, to affect changes that we would not have been able to do otherwise, I think both, is very, leads me to be very optimistic about being a planner right now. In a couple of different things, a couple of different ways. you all know, of course, because of what you've learned in this program and your experiences, that we were in a very fragile state economically, and there was tremendous inequities in our community in all different areas to begin with. This pandemic has, of course, made those even more pronounced. And I think that as we look to recover and look to change the way that we do things, the type of perspective, the type of training, the type of experiences that you have as planners, especially with recognizing and mitigating and addressing inequities, is going to be in great demand. Because I think that everything that we look at today and into the future will be, how do we restart our economy? How do we, assuming that we do have a large recovery stimulus act passed, how do we make those investments in a way not just to return to what we were before, but to address some of the challenges that we went into COVID with and leave our community better off? And I think that is going to be a great opportunity for you as you enter into or continue along in this profession. So I'm very optimistic. I would echo some of the things that others had said, that one of the other needs that's going to be, we're going to come out of this with either greater need to address, is community engagement. I think that especially for infrastructure projects, but also policy development, we're going to see increased emphasis on meaningful community engagement. And I think that that's an area where that's going to be in demand. But I also think that, and I think looking at whether it's job titles, and I laughed at business process consultant because that seems to be the title that gets used at the city when they can't figure out what the real title is, but it's great. But I also think other fields or other employers or industries where you didn't think to look, I think there's great opportunity there. I just got off of a call with some folks looking, and this is more in the economic development realm, how do we leverage some of these resources that are going to become available to save live music venues, which have been really hurt in this process. So we're looking at different economic models. We're looking at real estate. We're looking at shared services. All of these things where if we're going to be successful, we're probably going to have to put a planner on it, right? So I'm real excited about some of the discussions that are happening, and I'm excited for y'all. Although it must be terrifying kind of coming into this because there is such great uncertainty. But I hope that you can remain optimistic and be patient, because I think there is going to be some great opportunity coming out of this.
Okay. So I want to direct the next question to Katie and Martha, which is more about, both of you are working in consultancies where you're often working with public entities, but with lots of different types of clients. So I wondered if you could talk about what you've been hearing. Are you seeing projects being put on hold? What's going on in your world, and what advice would you have?
Martha, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, Zach already mentioned that the disaster recovery world, because of Harvey and because the funding has been set aside, there is a lot of funding still allocated towards disaster recovery programs and projects that are already, sort of underway. Once funds are allocated in that way, they're not clawed back, generally speaking. So these are things that are in the pipeline, and they're going to continue to be in the pipeline. There are funds that have a 6-year time horizon, and then funds that have, again, as Zach mentioned, a 12-year time horizon. So the positions and the jobs and the work associated with those funds or for which those funds are earmarked are going to continue moving forward. Now, and we have heard I don't know if this is true or not, but this whole COVID situation could be, you know, there could be CDBG or community development block grant funding allocated to recovery efforts towards this particular disaster as well. So there, you know, unfortunately, disasters do not seem to stop. And so there, you know, it does seem to be sort of a pretty consistent funding stream if, you know, someone wants to get into that sort of specialized world.
And are you all hiring people right now in that area?
Yes, we have, we currently are looking at potentially hiring 3 more project managers. That's the term we use a lot. As everyone's mentioned, you know, planners, you know, there are all these catch-all titles that are often used in planning or in jobs, but the ones we use a lot are project managers, grant managers, and coordinators. So we have potentially up to 3 project manager positions working on just regular CDBG funded projects, which are funds associated with non-entitlement communities. They get, there's an open competition for projects that are usually infrastructure. They can include housing, they can include planning, and you know, even some parks and sidewalks and safe routes to school types of programs. And then we have 3 positions, I think, working with the General Land Office, which where Zach until recently worked, and so those folks are working specifically as, in some ways, as staff augmentation to the state to help in specifically Harvey recovery and mitigation. I don't know, Katie, if you want to talk about what y'all have got.
Yeah, so Asakura Robinson, you know, I think we're kind of uniquely situated because we're at a size of a firm that, you know, allows us, I think, to be a little bit more nimble, and we're a little bit shyer about when we hire people. And so it takes a long time of me working overtime to make a case for, no, you know, this amount of work is sustainable in the long term. And so we haven't had any of the kind of actually layoffs that some of the large planning firms have had already. Kind of the engineering led planning firms, the AECOMs, the Perkins and Will, the PATH, you know, those kind of firms. And so I think we've actually been really stable and growing. And the variety of our work between landscape architecture, urban design, and urban planning, I think also situates us to be pretty resilient. So, you know, we've had some of our private work on the design side that's delayed, but actually our planning work has picked up. And I think some of this is because that funding is already allocated. I would also say that, you know, in terms of our planning work, we're also diverse in the kind of funders who are funding that work. And so we've been doing a lot more work that's foundation funded. And that work is not going to stop. And most of that work is also around topics that are really pertinent right now. And so public health, you know, so we have some funding that's going from St. David's Foundation or Houston Endowment. And those are 2 organizations that fund a lot of health focused work, parks focused work, and just general community resilience work. And I don't see that ending anytime soon. And we're looking at that kind of stuff. But then we're also pulling in, you know, as other folks have said, federal funding for other work and state level work. So we're doing some GLO work down on the coast, and we are actively searching for other federal projects because we recognize that those are going to be more stable. Other place that we've had a little bit of uncertainty is we do a lot of smaller projects with some small nonprofits, and some of that work's grant funded through those nonprofits. And what we see as a really good thing is that some of the funders of that work have allowed nonprofits to shift that funding to operational funds to keep them alive and say, you don't have to move forward with that project if you need this as a lifeline to pay your salaries of your staff and keep your operations going on your nonprofit. And so we've had a couple scares on the nonprofit driven work, but actually none of that has been affected. But I know other firms who do that work or other nonprofits are starting to scale back as well. And then I would also say, something that certainly makes us more resilient and something to look for in a consulting firm, if you're looking for something that is going to be more stable in the long term, is, so, okay, we have this diverse set of funders that we go after. We have different scales of work and different types of clients, from private to public to nonprofit to foundation-driven work. And then, we also have really diverse topics. And so we have principals and senior folks who focus on housing and transportation, and I focus more on climate resilience and climate action and parks and open space. And I think that we always see kind of ups and downs in the focus of what topics people really want to engage with. And I think that is another thing to look for in a firm that can kind of adapt and respond to the needs of the communities right now. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I would just add one thing, which is for anyone who entering the field, definitely don't limit your search to just firms or, to localities or to firms that have planning in their names, because a lot of engineering firms and a lot of other firms have planning divisions or components where your skill set, could plug in and complement whatever might be, their primary business.
That's an area where community engagement is also, typically integrated into almost all of the things that they're doing these days.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I would also say that I think it's going to be particularly important for anyone who's applying for jobs to not shy away from talking about how this is a time to be adaptable and be innovative in how you can help, a firm's practice or a department adapt. I think we're having to really pivot huge, engagement events to virtual or physically distant events. We just kicked off a neighborhood plan in Montrose in Houston that I'm leading, and we've come up with like neighborhood public art scavenger hunts that you can do without having to be in a group. And how are we doing we're doing a Facebook Live event with a Latinx DJ to kick off instead of our normal community workshop. And I think I think making sure that you're not shying away from talking about how you are ready to come out with big ideas and be adaptable in the face of this is really important. It's not just the same letter you would have written, for that cover letter 5 months ago.
Yeah.
Just to jump on that real quick, in the disaster recovery realm, there are a bunch of accounting firms that are very involved in that. You wouldn't think that, but because they're dealing with federal grant dollars, they've kind of morphed into this side of the field. If anyone wants to move to Puerto Rico, they have $20 billion in disaster recovery funds.
Wow.
And it's a paradise down there, so consider that.
Well, that was the next question. If you had advice for people about how to think differently about their job search right now. So I think those are all great suggestions. I just want to see if others have other ones to add to what's already been said, or if anybody wants to expand on that. Matt?
I'll just jump in real quick with a comment. I mean, I think professional affiliations are a marvelous way to meet people, stay plugged in, get job tips. I mean, it sounds kind of obvious, but it works. And so I really encourage you guys to join up with your local planning groups. And then this is just another, I look around my work group, we're a group of about 12 or 13 folks. Almost every one of us, down to almost, there's only 2 or 3 exceptions, actually started out as interns or temps. And then it may be a difficult situation where there's no opportunities to get paid for some of this work, which is incredibly disappointing. And I was very crestfallen when we saw that we couldn't hire temps, because we were hoping to hire a few folks this summer. But it is also possible, and I know not everybody's in this position, but it is also possible to volunteer. And I would just try to figure out if there's somebody that you're especially excited about, some line of work, some agency, some department. Get in there, talk to them, say, look, I can spend some time with you guys, and I'll do, here's how I can help you out. And you're basically making yourself indispensable. You're making yourself seen and heard. So that sounds kind of obvious, but I think just being in the game is such a big deal. And I know that, again, a huge percentage of our group, including me, I started out as a temp, or an intern, and then turned into a temp for a little while, and then worked for about 1 year and 8 months doing that. I was a research assistant at CRP under Kent Butler long ago. So, I mean, I just think there's a lot of ways to get in there. I guess I didn't want to just throw in a few things. I just keep hearing the words, and I'm just super resonating with me. So write them down. Engagement, resilience, disaster recovery. I mean, we live in a really changing, difficult world. This is not a surprise or big news for anybody, but those are, like John Michael mentioned, those are opportunities, and it's needed. We need people to help in these roles. And in my own work, we're working on this. Katie's actually super involved in this project, this community climate plan. It has a big equity focus. We just revamped our floodplain regulations to acknowledge much greater risk, and that had a heavy planning role in it with our planning group. And then I mentioned our Watershed Protection Master Plan, and that's going to have a climate and sustainability and equity focus as well. So trying to pick some of these areas that are really going to be emerging, that already are big. I mean, I'm just saying the same things that everybody else is, but I'm really wanting to underscore that, because I see that too. And like John Michael, I'm pretty excited about it.
Katie, I think you wanted to add.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think that regardless of where you focused your academic career in planning, I think that this is certainly not saying that you need to completely pivot. I think that when we're talking about engagement and resilience and recovery, I think that's a matter of framing. Regardless of what you focused on in planning school, whether it was more on the economic development side or the housing side or more environmental, I think that getting well versed in how you frame your knowledge and your expertise and what you can add through the lens of resilience or equity or engagement is really what we're talking about. Not that you need to learn an entirely new skill set to be able to qualify for those jobs. And I think that that's a really important lesson I've learned since I graduated, is really that to be a good planner, one of the biggest skills you need is how to speak different languages and code switch for talking to different people in different contexts, whether it's a community member or an engineer who does flood resilience, or like someone who runs a housing nonprofit. And I can talk about resilience very differently, but to all of those people. And I think that's exactly what a good planner needs to be able to do. And now's a good time to practice that framing and be able to code switch.
Scott? Yep. Thanks, Katie.
It may be very cliche to say it, but I just have found it to be true over and over again that my network has been what has gotten me new jobs, new positions, advancements. And basically, when I got my first internship that was post, I was kind of on the verge of graduating. It was because I went out and had lunch with some folks. They graciously allowed me to, that basically they invited me to lunch, and I just asked them for an internship. And since then, it's just been, every time I've made a move, it's because I knew somebody there, maybe with one exception, but it was really, and maybe I didn't know them very well, but I sort of started off with that acquaintance, and got to know more about them. Maybe did a phone call with them, and there were times when it was not that it took a while for that to bear fruit, but then eventually I've been able to turn those into some positions over time. So it's kind of it's who you know, that aspect. So and you already have a network of each other, and you have your professors, and you have us. And so we really are, we want to support you as much as we can in this. And so please feel free to reach out to me. And I probably can speak for most of the panelists here, and consider us to be part of your network, who are really trying to help you advance as you kind of get to this first or second or third rung of your career.
I'd say also, as far as your career is going to be long, and chances are you will run into the same people throughout your career, because they will be moving into different positions and you will as well. And the planning world is in many ways surprisingly small. So maintaining those connections and maintaining good relationships with past employers, past co-workers, and maintaining contact with those folks is I think really important, because all things being equal, if you have two resumes and someone, and they look pretty equal, and someone says, oh, I worked with that person, they were great to work with, that carries a lot of weight, possibly as much, if not more than, having a really impressive resume. So maintaining those relationships is important. This is as we've all acknowledged, this is an unprecedented time. So if you do find that you have the time to do so, to work on things like getting your AICP, and just getting that out of the way as soon as you can, this may be a good time to study and create study groups. And you may also, depending on where you want to go in your career, this may be an opportunity to look at other certifications if they're going to be beneficial. I'm not saying, look for certifications just to have, a set of, letters past your name, but if you think that they're going to be helpful for whatever career path you think you might want to head towards, now would be possibly a good time to look at that, because a lot more resources now are available online than ever before.
Anyone else want to add?
I was just going to say, this is certainly coming from like a place of privilege, but, I think that I've never found a job that I've thrived at that, was just a job. And I think that, if you're struggling to find, opportunities this summer, I think finding places where you can fit in the gaps about how you're going to be most impactful to that end, rather than, how am I going to get my job, I think usually actually leads to the latter. And I think that right now, thinking about how we can react to crisis and work to ensure that our most vulnerable communities are supported, I think that there's a lot of opportunities to do really impactful, really good work. And maybe that starts out as getting involved or following, city process, because that's still going and all online on ATXN, and you can follow along on that so you can get more aware of what the city's doing. But then there's also things like the Community Resilience Trust that just popped up in Austin, that's community led, that you could get involved with, that, all these things are part of, how you tell your story about what your value add is, but also are so much more meaningful when you get to say, look at this impact I had on community. And I think that that'll be a really important piece of, if you have a gap and you're not finding employment, like, what did you do in the meantime wasn't just about you.
Yeah. Let's see. I think we've kind of touched on some of these other questions, but one of the questions that we haven't talked about a lot is how all of you see planning practice changing moving forward in your own areas or generally. Anybody want to take that one? And Mike, sorry, I'm going to mute myself because my computer fan is going crazy.
Just a real brief comment. It's just, I'm going to say almost the exact same thing I said earlier, but those things I mentioned earlier with resiliency and engagement, disaster planning, those kinds of things, those are pretty new for, not that they're brand new, those have been around for decades, but well, not all of them, but it's just emerging as an essential set of tool set. Also, what you guys do with your GIS program within CRP is incredible, and we've the folks we've hired have been, you know, that we used to have kind of a separate GIS group and a planning group, and those are starting to merge, and I think that skill set's becoming more sort of essential as well. But I don't know. I think COVID's definitely going to shift us around, and I think we're going to see us. You know, I just think about some of the incredible work that Katie's done over the last couple of years that I've been looking at, and I think you've been ahead of the game on that stuff, Katie. And I think people are going to be looking at what you do, and what all of us do is not, hey, that's nice, you guys are trying to help us out a little bit here. It's going to be like, you're trying to keep us alive. You're actually trying to keep communities thriving and healthy, and giving people in a time of difficulty and climate change and so forth an edge on charting these new waters. So anyway, I think we're in a pretty awesome career path being planners, because we're trying to look at the past and present, but also really looking at the future to say, how can we plan for these kinds of things? And so I think that in some ways we've been doing the same, our jobs are similar to what they have been, but now there's going to be a new emphasis on doing this work and knowing and understanding how important it is, and how communities need each other to survive. It's not just a bunch of individuals out there fighting for whatever. It's going to be like, we're going to hang together. So anyway, I'm bullish on that piece of it for sure.
Sorry, just posted a question on the chat that I think relates to this. And her question is basically, do you envision the resilience measure that council passed recently opening up job opportunities in the near future? So, you know, we've been sort of talking bigger picture, but can you all talk a little bit about what's going to happen as a result of that resolution and where that might go?
Yeah, I can talk about that, but just to respond to what Matt said, I would be a little more harsh about the future of planning, because I think that we've been behind the curve, and I think that we haven't adapted in the way we need to envision what planning could be or needs to be, and that this should be a wake-up call. And then in terms of the resilience plan and the measure that passed at council, you know, so that passed on the 27th of last month, calling for, and just so everyone else is up to speed, it called for staff to come back to council in June with a course of action to hire a chief resilience officer and to complete a comprehensive resilience plan. And there's a lot of content in that resolution, a lot of whereases, a lot of intent that went into it, a lot of community support around it. I think that between now and June, there's a lot of conversations that still need to happen about actually how to move that forward, how to fund it, whether there's outside funding, whether we use enterprise funding from other departments. All that to say, I think it's probably unlikely that it will include new job opportunities beyond the chief resilience officer position. And that I think the community voice has really been looking to, you know, if we hire a chief resilience officer, that person would either be nested within equity office or amplify the mission and the power of the equity office and not be an additional redundancy. And so I would imagine that position would also be working directly with existing staff positions across offices, since that is seen as really an opportunity to convene across departments in a way that we haven't effectively done in the past around community resilience. I think in the long term, potentially, but not in the near term. Does that help?
With regard to resilience, it is a different program, but in the mitigation funds for Harvey, there is an unprecedented amount of money allocated to planning. And I believe, Zach can speak more to this, but I believe that those funds are going to be allocated to a resilient communities program, resilient being a very popular word now. But those are going to be larger scale regional plans for, you know, drainage systems, and looking at you know, how can communities prepare for and respond to current situations, including, you know, increased flooding because of climate change, or you know, weather pattern changes. So you know, it is nice to see that there is a recognition that planning has has value, and that it is needed at a multi-jurisdictional level. We'll see what results from those plans, but there is money set aside in this mitigation funding for that. And I would imagine that whichever firm or firms are successful in getting those awards will be looking to fill positions for that.
One more thing about the resilience stuff is that the county and Commissioner Bridget Shea is also really excited about the resilience work, and that also might be another avenue for future positions at a county scale, because they're going to want to partner on what this looks like, speaking to the regional work.
Yeah, so just jumping off of what Martha said, so as part of the action plan for Texas's $4 billion in hazard mitigation funds, there's a $100 million program for planning that we call the Resilient Communities Plan. And it's going to be for comp plans, zoning updates, building codes, you know, you name it. But there has to be a tie to hazard mitigation and resiliency in it. So these plans, you know, they can be a comp plan, but it's a comp that now really needs to speak to the county's hazard mitigation plan as well. So I think kind of broader, going back to what Liz asked earlier, I think the field as a whole is going to be a bit more integrated with the different parts that have existed and kind of worked in their silos over time. I think we're going to be working to break down those silos a bit more and think about the broader picture of, you know, the world we face in a changing climate, disasters, you know, disease, pandemics. We're going to have to start thinking more broadly. But specifically towards that money, it's probably going to be about a year before that program gets going. But that is a really unprecedented amount of funding that's going to be spent just within 140 eligible counties within Texas. But that's money that's just going to be in Texas. Cities, counties, COGS, different jurisdictions are going to apply for those funds to do the plans that they feel necessary, and then they'll probably go out and hire a consultant to write those plans. So it'll be those firms working on behalf of those jurisdictions that you should really keep an eye out for in terms of upcoming jobs. Again, you know, this is 12 years worth of funding, so it's really going to be a long-term investment. And on top of that, there's another $30 million specifically for hazard mitigation plans, which in pretty much almost every county within Texas has a hazard mitigation plan. That's something they submit to FEMA and it gets approved. And they have to do it every 5 years. So there's pretty much enough funding for every one of those eligible counties to do 2 of those plans over the next 12 years. So, you know, if disaster recovery and hazard mitigation was only on your peripheral radar, this is an ongoing need and funding source that I would definitely consider pivoting to. Even if it's not your particular interest, you can bring your skills to bear there. You know, I did a ton of GIS mapping and data analysis with regard to that. And, you know, you think disaster recovery, you're like, we're responding to a disaster, but recovery is long-term. So you're focusing on rebuilding housing and infrastructure and economic development, which are all within the planner's wheelhouse. So definitely consider that.
So we have another question that was posted for the panelists from Jordan. How do you suggest reaching out to companies that are offering jobs that we may be interested in, and any advice for standing out in an interview? Who would like to tackle that one?
One thing I won't comprehensively answer that, but I found having hard skills that you can sell to an employer is really important. You know, I know how to do GIS. I know how to do these particular functions within GIS. That goes a long way. You know, being very well versed in Excel, Access, any of these programs will make you jump out, because as soon as you're there and you're dealing with people who don't know these programs well, they're going to think you're a wizard and very highly value you. And that'll also go a long way into you maintaining that job and getting future positions.
Yeah, and I would say maybe referring back to what Katie said earlier, I mean, the resume really is the thing that gets you in the door. The thing that's going to make you stand out is just, doing a really good job in the interview. So being prepared, knowing about the firm or the organization or the city that you're applying for, knowing as much as you can about the challenges that they're facing, or the scope of work or the job itself, really does make the difference, because it shows that you did your homework, you cared enough to do your homework. And back to, I think, what was said earlier also, is that the generic cover letter isn't going to cut it. So just making yourself stand out by really thinking about, is this the job I want? Why do I want this job? And tailoring your whatever you present to them to that. And then just a quick note, going back to the previous question, as far as what's changing in the planning profession, I mean, APA has an incredible amount of resources, and the National Planning Conference was online this year, and all of the sessions are recorded. So it's a great way to find out what, at the national level people are talking about, and what is important in the planning profession right now.
I might just really agree with both of those statements and say that in gathering information, and one thing is, you'd be surprised at how many people don't do their homework, and they send out the same cover letter, they send out the same resume. You can tailor it. There are sort of formulaic ways of tailoring it, and there are ways that you can sort of build like some alternate resumes that you can you look at the job posting and you say, okay, they need A, B, and C. That means that I'm going to go for resume number 1. And then you might, you sort of start to build an arsenal of different resumes, as well as arsenal of different cover letters. Some of that information, some of that homework that you can do, I would go back to your network and see who you know at that firm. If you don't know somebody at that firm, maybe you know somebody who knows somebody. So, I mean, obviously a lot of this information, maybe it's a private sector firm, their portfolio is online. But, if you know somebody there, you can really talk about the work that they do, and you can try to find out like what they really need for that job. So then that's going to set you up to go into that interview and just blow them away, because you'll be able to talk about what they do. And it's really, you're telling a story. You're telling them the story of you and that company, and how you're really a match made in heaven, because you are the person with your skills, and they are the company that needs these skills. And then when they hire you, and of course you don't want to be too presumptuous, but when that can happen, then you can really move the ball forward for them. So that's worked in the past for me. And LinkedIn, if you're not on LinkedIn, they can tell you, you can look up that company, Asakura Robinson or GrantWorks, and you can say, okay, well, I don't know Katie Coyne, but I know somebody who knows Katie Coyne, and then maybe they can introduce me, or maybe I can find out whatever they know. So, using that network in that way.
I would say too that, don't wait for a posting to be up. And also, I've realized in the years since I've been out of school that like even Matt Hollon over there with his wisdom beard, he still wants to grab a virtual beer with me as much as the next guy. So I think like there's always a balance between
I haven't gotten that invitation, Matt. What's up?
one
standing invitation, sir.
balance between the formal and the informal. But if you catch people out of a formal cycle of like hiring, you're able to have a more personal conversation. And like, so I've had multiple like virtual happy hours with students or with colleagues at, like Austin Parks Foundation. I just had a happy hour with someone, and like, I think that kind of connection, you're able to get to know someone very differently than what it is in a more formal process. And those are the connections that really pay off down the road. And then I think the other thing is, I think the old school is leave your emotion out of professional stuff that you do, out of the way you write, out of all of that. And I kind of think that's bullshit. And, look, if you're applying for a job at an engineering firm, and it's very buttoned up, like probably don't use the same tone in your letter. But if I get a letter that's just like, I know how to do GIS and here are my technical skills, I'm not hiring that person. I want to know why you love parks and why it's important to you, and you have all of these emotions around your work that make you passionate and that are going to make you give a shit. And it's not just a paycheck. And so I think that striking that balance is about knowing your audience, but also not being shy about making sure that you're weaving some of that personal story in a way that makes sense for who you're talking to.
I absolutely agree with what Katie said. And then just for my own part, let me preface this, and I've said this before, I'm a terrible manager, but I feel like I'm good at hiring people when I used to hire a lot of people. And the reason that what I would look for is passion. And I would look for people who have demonstrated some leadership ability, almost without regard to what it is. Whether it was leading, a church group or some volunteer effort or some club at school, because passionate leaders don't need to be managed. They don't need to be motivated. They just get stuff done. And as somebody who in my experience, and forgive me, to my friends who work at the city, is that, that you can either be, an expert or something, or you can be a manager, right? But I think what happens in places like the city is that they promote the experts into management, and it's almost like you spend all your time managing, you don't get to be the expert anymore, or not to spend as much time being the expert anymore. I refuse to do that myself. That's why I manage 0 people now. But when I would try to hire people who were, the skills were important, certainly, but I was looking for passion. I was looking for people who have led, who have finished things, almost without regard to what it is. Finish a project, led things, and were passionate about the work, because I didn't have to spend my time managing them. And especially as, I don't buy into the fact that we're going to get away from offices, we're going to get away from gatherings. It's just how humans are. But I do think there's going to be a lot more distributed work. And I would hate to be a manager if that happens, because, how do you motivate people in a setting like this? It's really, really hard. I know if I ever find myself in the unfortunate position of having to manage people and hire people again, I'm going to go back to looking for people that I don't have to motivate, that I don't have to check in with them 5 times a day. I'm going to be looking for people who are passionate about the work, who are mission driven, who are self-motivated, and who get stuff done. And I think that's what we ought to be looking for.
I think for when we're looking for folks, one of the things, in addition to having the base set of skills that we often find that planners have, and that's why we keep on going to the CRP well, is, and I think this is another skill that planners often have, is an ability to play well with others. Because if you are a highly technically competent person, but cannot get along with people and cannot work in a team environment, your incredible technical skills are not helpful. So I would say definitely, you know, when we look at hiring and we look at who's going to be a good fit, we look at people who can work well in a team environment and who have good critical thinking skills. And you know, back to I think something Katie may have said earlier, just being able to code switch and talk to people, you know, people at the city level and folks at the state and other consulting firms and engineering firms, someone who can sort of, you know, talk well and represent themselves well in many environments. That is a valuable person, and it's a valuable skill to have.
Matt, I think you were trying to get in there earlier.
Oh, I was just gonna, I'm echoing everybody else. Good job on the tips for sure. And I there was a kind of a, how do you stand out in the interview itself? And obviously you mentioned energy and so forth. There's kind of a series of relatively obvious, predictable questions you're going to get in interviews. And so I totally advise anybody to think about what those might be and to prepare and maybe to practice a few times with a friend or what have you on that going in. We're going to ask you about, like, you know, some difficult project, you know, talk about something exemplary that you've done, you know, talk about your background, those kinds of things. And so, not that you want it to be canned or rote or something, but I mean, coming out with you know, you're only going to have a certain amount of time in the interview. And so you want to use your time really wisely instead of, you know, and so a lot of it's kind of predictable. And you could probably even just look up some of the, you know, common interview questions and so forth. But anyway, I echo these other, you know, reaching out beforehand and so forth kinds of things as well. But anyway, I know we have another question too. Should we, looks like on the chat.
Yeah, so Elena had a question for Katie. Can you speak to what Asakura Robinson looks for in planning portfolios from applicants?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the, you know, the position. You know, like I said, we have folks who specialize in different kinds of planning, and sometimes we're looking for someone interested in housing, and other times we're looking for an urban ecology candidate for the planning side of the urban ecology work. And I think the common things that we're looking for in portfolios, though, are, you know, especially compared to other planning firms, because we are an interdisciplinary firm with designers, we really expect a high level of ability to be able to communicate visually. And so that includes the way you lay out your portfolio, and not to say that as planners you need to be able to, like, show us that you can do a rendering or something, but showing us how you communicate, you know, in some way graphically is going to let us know, even if you haven't done much of it in the past, like, even if you have the ability to learn and grow in that. You know, so maybe you're really good at layout and you could probably get better at, like, the infographic and diagrammatic kind of visuals, or like a neighborhood plan or map graphic, but like we need to at least see a sneak peek of you know, your ability to grow on the graphic side, and that's what's missing most from planning applicants coming from certain schools that maybe don't focus as much on the graphics. But then the other thing is, I think, you know, we in terms of your written communication, it's really hit or miss about who is able to weave a story in a way that's pretty artful. And I think that that can go in two different directions. Sometimes we get people with more of a sciencey background before planning, and then the kind of writing that they're doing is more dry. And it's like, here are the facts, but you haven't synthesized it into a story that makes sense for the client or for the way that it's relevant to the community. And so there's that end. And then we get other folks who maybe they were like an English, you know, undergrad or something, or like very fluffy writing. you know, 3 sentences that could have been said in one. And I think really clearly articulating how your writing is weaving together the storytelling, but still concise is another place that we really struggle to find really strong applicants for that writing piece. And it's tough too, because, you know, a lot of the writing that we do, you need to have enough experience to be able to get into the weeds on housing policy or something. And so you're going to need, you know, assistance from senior folks to be able to do that. But there's certainly a big gap there in a lot of our more junior hires.
Okay, so looking at our other questions, we've talked about a lot of this stuff. We also
I
had
work for Katie.
What?
I want to work for Katie.
Oh. We had a question on here about COVID. Do you see any COVID-related funds or initiatives that might create opportunities within planning? John Michael spoke to this a little bit, but I'm wondering just a lot of the themes coming out of the conversation to me, I think what planners bring as strengths are an ability to see connections between issues. You know, using an equity lens is something we talk about a lot. Now I just forgot the other.
Engagement, community engagement.
Yes, that was it. Yes, the obvious one, community engagement. So, I mean, to me, thinking about COVID, prior to COVID, we were already talking a lot about health and the relationship between lots of aspects of planning in cities and health, and that we should have been thinking about with health in mind and that we weren't before. And this, to me, just seems like that throws that into much higher relief. And I know at UT, we have a group of people that have been talking about trying to create a dual degree between public health and planning. And I hope we'll get there, but it's going to take us, you know, several years of bureaucracy and brain damage to get there. But still, in the meantime, I feel like those kind of skills, like earlier, I think Katie was talking about how do you frame what you know and how do you frame what you bring to particular things. And I think those are things that planners bring that are different than what other fields bring, that you may have an interest in a particular area, but you were exposed to a lot of areas in your education and you had to work on projects where you had to think about the connections between things, and using an equity lens inherently means you have to think about those connections. And now this health is yet another lens that's related to equity and all these other areas too. Those, you know, those skills, thinking about those skills and how they might relate to what comes next or what we're going to need to think about in planning in different areas, I think is, would be compelling to talk about yourself as someone who could contribute to that or has ideas about that. So I just thought I'd throw that out there as someone who's not going to hire, who hires research assistants rather than permanent employees. But I don't know if any other panelists want to say anything about COVID-related job opportunities or just how it might influence, you know, existing departments and the way they think about their work and who they want to hire.
I might jump in for a second and just say that PARD, Parks and Recreation at the City of Austin, we have long used a metric, which is the acreage of parks per 1,000 people. And I think prior to COVID, that seemed like a very abstract thing. Like, why do you need certain square footage per person? Well, I mean, in this day and age, 6 feet, right? So the idea is that, you know, even if not everybody is following this, that we really, one of the things that has remained open, with, I think Easter weekend, they were closed, but most parks have remained open. Recreation centers, a lot of them have closed, but some of the outdoor spaces people can still use, and as long as they're keeping their distance. So I think that COVID has kind of brought more relevance to parks and put more attention on parks as, you know, and that's been connected to health, as well as just something that people can do when they're not working, and they can take a break from all of this.
Yeah. Just real quick, I think, I'm not sure about, funding and money, but, disease and public health has throughout history driven planning, from the development of water and wastewater systems and that piece of infrastructure to the first, building codes. They were, focused around public health, and even some, actual big master plans like in Paris were in some cases responses to public health. But I think it'll remain to be seen how this plays out. But just looking at cities around the country, closing down streets to cars to open them up to pedestrians and cyclists. I think if we can demonstrate that we need more public space for humans to interact and just be out, it might have an actual impact on the profession and just in general how we are creating our cities going forward.
Just say, so I lead the urban ecology studio at my firm, and the entire point of that is integrating more science and data into what is already a community and equity driven process for all of our work. And I think that needs to become a little bit more of a new norm for planning, is being really explicit about what data and science and community input is backing up your claims. So when we get into this health work, we've done like health-focused parks plans. We just, we're about to release for Episcopal Health Foundation a Healthy Places toolkit that's all about different tools that clinics can help partner with other folks in their community or lead on getting implemented that have to do with the built environment and health. And everything that we're putting into projects like that around health has citations tying back to peer-reviewed literature that says, no, these are legitimate correlations. We're not just saying in a mushy way, like, don't you feel better when you go to a park? And so all that to say, I think if we're not making a scientific case for why you should keep funding parks work or connectivity work and sidewalk work, especially, I want to be able to walk around my neighborhood, without having an accessibility issue. And things like that, if we're not tying that back to the data and science around it, then it's a lot easier for people to say, well, I don't know, I don't know that I have to believe that you say that that's important. Maybe I'll just pull funding from there. And all that also to say that there are a number of research institutions, non-academic research institutions, like, for instance, Houston Advanced Research Center, HARC, Kinder Institute, we have a planning alumni that just got a job there, Luis Guajardo, and all of those folks who are leading research that's very much at the intersection of planning and health and resilience. I think that there's going to be a greater need to collaborate with and actually amplify their ability to do research around this as well.
All right, well, we're about through the list that I have prepared. I think we've touched on most of them. So I don't know if I'm looking to the chat. No new questions have popped up yet. So do our panelists want to offer some parting comments or announce any job openings or remind us about job openings that they've mentioned? Oh, and I was going to say, Martha, please send us those positions, if you haven't already, the ones that you mentioned.
Sure. Yeah, it's, I'm sure it's a very scary time to be looking at entering any profession. But I think y'all are well armed with a great skill set that, that you learn through the CRP program. That will make you valuable in a number of different specializations and professions. I would just say keep your eyes open and definitely now more than ever, you may have to widen your net and look for opportunities rather, in more fields than what you had in mind, just 3 months ago. But definitely, there are opportunities out there, and good luck to y'all.
Yeah, I would say, at this point in your career, don't limit yourself at all. Just get a job. It might probably not going to be the job you have forever, so don't worry if it's not exactly what you want to do. But the ability to learn how to be a good worker is really important. And you're going to pick up skills wherever you are, whether they're really, hard technical skills or the soft skills of learning how to work well with people. This is not the time to be picky. I finished school in 2007, and then there was a Great Recession a year later. I was super lucky to have a job that was actually CDBG funded, and that was the reason I didn't lose my job, and someone else in my division did. But at that point, I was like, I'm just happy to be here and do whatever you guys want me to do. So I think that's the attitude you should take right now. And in terms of job openings, I think the GLO will probably be hiring for the position I just left on Friday. And there are a lot of other jobs that pop up there. And for any other state job, you're going to need to sign up on the Texas Workforce Commission's website. I think it's texasworkforce.com. So go there, set up an account. It is absolutely not user-friendly at all. It is the worst job portal ever made. But go through the pain of doing that. Once you've done the work of putting a resume and all that information in, it's super easy to apply for jobs. Just know that some of the keywords you put in have to match the job you're actually applying for. So you might have to go back and add a particular interest that has this phrase like management analysis or something like that. Otherwise, you won't be able to actually apply for that job. But if you have any questions about that, please feel free to get in touch with me. Sean Strange, who's also a CRP grad, still working there in the division I work with, and he's a manager. He's a great guy. And if you're interested in disaster recovery at all, definitely reach out to him. He's a wealth of information, and we'll know about all the jobs posting coming up. And I know he sends them to the UT listserv as well to post when the ones popping up.
Yeah, Sean is the person who brought us all those summer intern positions that I know people have been applying for. If you don't have the chat open yet, you should open it, because Matt has posted information about the link to the Planner 3 job with Watershed, the Kent Butler internship. I didn't mention yet, but I just sent it out yesterday. We finally got all the details worked out to do that. So that's an internship with his department or his group within Watershed. And the applications for that are due next Wednesday. So please take a look at that. Scott posted his contact information and also mentions that TxDOT is always hiring. Okay, so I want to let others make their parting comments.
We've said a lot here, and I don't want to pile on. So anyway, just thanks so much for everybody's attention and good questions and good discussion here. It's great to see all of my friends on the panel. And anyway, don't hesitate to reach out, students out there that are interested. That's the way it works.
I appreciate you pulling this together. And good luck to everybody. I think it was mentioned earlier, if we can be helpful in any way, I'm sure everybody here will be here to help each other out. I just say, going into this pandemic issue and coming out of it, I don't think any of the problems that we had before have gone away. I think they've only become more urgent and more imperative that we have planners engaged in solving them. I hope, again, that this creates greater opportunity, not just for employment, but actually for planners to be effective, in getting things done, to actually make that impact, which I would assume is why everybody has chosen this profession. And that is because you want to change the world for the better. and see this as an avenue for doing that. And so my hope is, again, you know, not only are there more jobs, but you'll be able to more successfully accomplish the things you want to accomplish because of the renewed imperative around some of the issues we've needed to solve forever anyway.
Well, Scott, Katie.
Yeah, we've thrown a lot of information at y'all. I just, you know, I'm always a resource for folks if you want to reach out, and I'm easy to find, but I'll also put my email in here if folks have follow-up questions. But yeah, just, it's a tough time, but you know, good luck in your searches, and you know, you have a team of alumni and faculty and peers who are all rooting for you.
Scott, did you already say something? I can't remember.
Hey, real
Just-
quick, Elizabeth, I got to jump off to a 1:30 transportation meeting, but I really appreciate the chance to participate.
you.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I don't want to
Thank
be
you
too
so
abrupt.
Thank you,
Just-
Matt.
Yeah, just thank y'all. Nothing to add. Really appreciate the chance to be part of this.
All right, so I think, Julie, we'll try and capture the contact stuff that was listed here in the chat so we can send it out to the student list.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll get it to you in case
Yeah.
you miss it. Thank you again to all our panelists. This was incredible. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Happy to do it. Have a good one.
All
Thanks.
right, everybody, have
Thank
a
you.
good weekend.
Take care, everyone.